Maritime Matters is brought to you live by Bahamas Maritime Connection.
What is maritime?
Maritime, simply put, relates to navigation or commerce on the high seas.
Some say money makes the world go round. I say ships move the money that make the world move.
Who navigates those large international ships?
How often are international ships required to be surveyed and inspected?
Maritime also protects our seas and borders by way of our local Bahamas Defense Force.
It is very sad to say that out of 1,500 plus ships that are registered under the Bahamian flag, only a very small amount of Bahamians are employed.
Maritime Matters.
And pleasant good evening to you, our valued listening audience. Welcome one, welcome all. Welcome to Maritime Matters. I am your host, Captain Glenn Bain, and of course, our wonderful producer for tonight is the maestro himself, Mr. Craig Gibson. We're coming to you live via Love 97 FM. This is Tuesday, the 12th day of August, 2025. And of course, if it's a Tuesday, it's Maritime Matters. Be encouraged that if you're driving and tune in with us, please do so cautiously and ensure to take your time in getting wherever it is you are trying to get safely. As the saying goes, drive to arrive alive. Our sponsors for tonight's show, again, 101 Pharmacy and also Island Care Pharmacy. For all your medication needs, check out my little cousin Shantia McBride and the lovely team at 101 Pharmacy in Nassau and Island Care Pharmacy in Freeport. Fill your prescription at the store or send your refills via the online site, 101pharmacy.com. That's 101 Pharmacy, all lowercase, all one word, .com. The three locations are East Street South, and of course when you go in East Street South, you gotta hail my girl Joy. Joy is the pharmacist who fixed me right up the other day. Let me tell you something. Joy know these things inside out. If you tell Joy what your situation is, well, of course, you gotta get a doctor to say what's going on. She will know exactly how to put your package together. So all you gotta do is call her up, and you get your package ready, pay a little something, and you're good to go. That's East Street South and Joy. Of course, they got the second location, Charles Sanders Highway. As you make good cousin Scylla just hang out. Scylla run the money. She run things up in there. So say hi to Scylla when you go to 101 Pharmacy on Charles Sanders Highway. And of course, downtown Freeport, Explorers Way, the big one, where my big sis Steph hangs out, my big cuz. And of course, that would be Island Care Pharmacy. We are secondly sponsored by Bahamas Maritime Connection Limited. And at BMC, we provide a full slate of ISPS maritime security services. Good night to my good old anime. And when I say old, I mean old. Anime is 92 and going strong, almost 93. Well, 93 next year. But anime is rolling. She's ticking, she's talking, she's walking, she's doing all the things she's supposed to do. Boy, but she got a sharp mind and sharp brain. Boy, when you start talking anime, you get blown away. She's that sharp. She don't miss a beat. You're listening to Maritime Matters, and on this show, we talk maritime. Tonight, we engage a very hot topic, a very timely topic, and of course, this a big, huge one. Tonight, we dedicate this Maritime Matters show to the history of marine piloting in the Bahamas. Some people say maritime piloting, we say marine piloting. It's the same difference. You got the pilots who fly the planes, then you got the pilots who bring the ships in and out of the harbor. We don't sail too far. Boy, but we got skill to bring them in and out the harbor safely, eh? So that's what we be talking about. What is marine piloting all about? Where it came from? How long we had it going on in this country? Where is it now? Where is it going? Boy, we got a full show tonight. So discussion surrounding this hot topic shall include pilots in general, pilots as prescribed under the Port Authority Act. Now see, one thing with this country and most countries, Everything you want to talk about, especially when you're dealing with licenses, you got to get that from the government. So if you want a license to be a marine pilot, you got to do a lot of things just to be eligible, to even be considered to be a marine pilot. But the Port Authority Act is that legislation under our laws that really steers us into all the things you need to bring to the table if you want to be a marine pilot. You know, marine pilots make plenty money. As much as you might think. They're supposed to be making plenty of money. But we can talk about that tonight too. Why they're making the kind of money they're supposed to be making. Boy, there's plenty of reasons. You could be shocked to find out tonight. Some making plenty of money. Some, well, you'll wonder if they're making pilot salary. Because when you compare that with across our waters, just the way across to Florida. If you tell somebody you're a marine pilot in Florida, that's Port of Miami, Port Everglades, Port Canaveral, Port of Tampa, all the major ports in Florida, and then basically all over the U.S. They know you're making, on average, $1,000 a day. Because the book says so, right? They have it set up in a way that the pilots make money. Because they look at the pilots as professional people that are providing this big-time professional service, and they should get professional pay. Only in the Bahamas that ain't happening. And only in the Bahamas we got, we got some greedy, right? Should I stop the greedy? Or you want me to go further than that? Evil, wicked. Oh, may soul rest in peace. What Mr. Rodney Monk used to say? Not saved or unsaved, uncircumcised Negroes that set out to take advantage of professional pilots. I ain't call no name. They say call no name, carry no blame. But these are the things we want to talk about tonight, among others. So the pilot's supposed to be making money, right? And the pilot's supposed to be doing some really challenging things. Like, you know, ships go to sea, they're riding the waves. And if you could be a pilot and you got to go on a big ship and try to bring that in, you got to be used to being on big ships. You got to know what it is to be on a big ship in the middle of the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean, where a ship going up and down, and you still got to navigate as a navigator. You still got to direct as a captain. You still got to make sure your equipment's solid as a mate, deckhand, whatever it is. You got to do what you got to do, even in rough weather. It's rough weather times when those captains need that pilot to safely get a ship from that peril in the ocean to that dock where there's no more movement. That's why pilots make the money, not for summertime, and the weather's so nice and anybody can bring the ship in once they know how to handle ships. Eh? You don't need that extra professionalism then. When you need it is when things really sour. That's when you really need that pilot to come to life and bring that ship in safely or take that ship out safely. Because you have conditions sometimes, it's raining, you can hardly see, it blowing from left to right, the wind shifting on you while you maneuvering the ship, and all kind of things going on. And you better know how to keep up with all of that. Because if you don't, that ship is in trouble. The ship may hit the ground, the ship may run aground. The ship may hit a dock, the ship may hit another ship. And that's what you don't want. And that's why pilots are supposed to be making the big bucks. So we'll talk about what is a maritime pilot. We'll talk about how does one become a marine or maritime pilot. We're going to talk about the expectations of an appointed marine pilot. Just like we talk about this now, you're expected to do it when it's rough. We want to talk about pilots as prescribed under the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. Because I want you to know, under the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, they talk about pilots because they know there's got for Deepwater Harbor. They talk about a port director who actually qualifies people or who actually license people once they qualify to be pilots in Freeport Harbor. And that director has similar power to the Minister of Transport, who's the only entity in this country that can issue licenses to pilots wherever they are, except if they are in the Deepwater Harbor of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. That's the only place. There used to be another place, Hatchet Bay Plantation. They were able to have a port director and appoint pilots too, but you know, that been gone. We ain't got right about that no more for the rest of our days. So, from whence we came, as far as this piloting thing is concerned, Nassau Harbor in its preliminary years, you know, after World War II, things start happening in all kind of funny ways. And we got big names. Like the Knowleses. Especially David Knowles came from. His daddy was a pilot. We had pilot Chris Brown, whose daddy was a pilot. And then I think somewhere down the line, a lot of those pilots, wasn't really making boys. Right? Because in those days now, the father passed the trade on to the son. And it was around this time when the country realized we need some laws surrounding this piloting thing. Just like we was making laws for everything else in maritime. The Port Authority Act, the Merchant Shipping Act, the Boat Registration Act, we was making laws. So laws came around, and part of those laws dealt with the appointment of pilots, dealt with the behavior of pilots, dealt with the requirements of pilots, and all the rest of that good stuff that we set out to talk about tonight. We want to talk about the meaning of the word pilot, the meaning in layman terms, the meaning based on the Port Authority Act, the meaning based on the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. What really is this pilot? You know, these laws give things the meaning that they're required to based on what we're doing. So when you go to the dictionary or you go to Google and you get the meaning for pilot, it ain't the same as it says in our laws back in the 50s, eh? Well, it ain't. I can tell you it ain't. And we can talk about some of that. So, Freeport Harbor had some preliminary years too, eh? And maybe you know, but Freeport had the Deepwater Harbor because they needed ships to come in and bring stuff. They also wanted to bring passengers, and they bought that. And then Barco came along. You know, Barco wanted to do some oil refining. And the crude oil would come there, and the refined oil would go out. Because there wasn't refining oil to stay in Grand Bahama. Grand Bahama couldn't use that amount of oil and fuel and all the rest of that stuff. But it provided a lot of jobs. But then they needed ships to come in and out. But there was no law. And there's still no law to cover Barco. But they got pilots. They got ships. Let's leave that there for now. And then, of course, Burma came around. Burma oil, which is now South Riding Point. Well, it's out South Riding Point. And again, like Barco, there was no law for them. So the only law that exists for Barco, which is now Buckeye, or Burma, which is now Louisthorne Boss, is the law under the Port Authority Act. It says that the minister is required to appoint pilot to pilot ships in and out of the harbor, or to the resting point in the country, whether it's to an anchorage or to an offshore jetty, whatever. And we got to look at that a little bit more. And then the laws were written, and the laws would state that a pilot has to provide a pilot boat that he is to keep maintained and is to be inspected by the Port Authority every year. Because each pilot, only 4, when the law first came out, Nassau could have only had up to 4 pilots at a time. But each pilot have to have his own pilot boat. So what used to happen? Now remember now, this in the 50s. So the boats were not pilot boats like what we see today with all the lights and the this and the that and going out there and hovering around. No, the boat ain't had no motor. Most of these boats were sailboats. And it's like a regatta going on. And the steamer all around the point the song say, when a ship come over the horizon, you have a race. Because the minister gave out 4 licenses and none of them was superior to the next. They would all race, and the first pilot reached that ship. And this is still an act, this ain't change. The first pilot reached that ship would take his flag out, give it to the ship, and tell them hoist that. And once that flag hoists and he's on that ship, that's his job. And that goes on to say, the pilot that bring in the ship has the right to take it out, so you don't have to worry about nobody touching the ship after you don't put that in. So you understand, that's the way the law was set up. But eventually, well, of course, this wasn't making no sense. See, back then we had a bunch of Bay Street boys running things. We had no black people, could have been no pilot. No black people who own a boat, no pilot boat. And they decided, this ain't making no sense, man. Because you know what some of them used to do? And I learned this from good source. You know, I trained on this to do with notes. And I used to go to a lot with Chris Brown, whose daddy was a pilot. Right? What they used to do back then, sometimes they go there before the break of dawn, looking for ships. Because the first one to find the ship and get to the ship is the one to get paid for the job. And you think it's a secret that Sir David Knowles would have been the best sailor we had in this country? He had to sail a boat for daddy to get on the boat before the rest. So he had to learn to be a fast sailor. You got to feel the wind. And thus he became an Olympic champion. But we don't do that no more, of course. But this is what it was like back in those days. Because you didn't have the agent like it is today, just advising when a ship coming in. He already knows which pilot is going to the ship. And well, of course, they got everything in loop now. So what they decided to do back then was let's unify. And we'll all bring in our ships, or we'll take turns on bringing in ships, and we'll share the money. So they formed what they regarded as an association of pilots to bring ships in. So all that hully-gully, hustling, trying to beat out the next one, all that gone away. And they had an association of equal owners. And then, of course, you had the situation with Freeport Harbor. Well, Freeport, based on the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, had a port director who could just appoint pilots, and then they you know, you remember now, Freeport was brand new. So then like they had a bunch of people in Freeport who had the capacity to even be pilots. They never used to do this before. So they had to bring in expats. And up until, I think I can safely say, the late 90s to the early 2000s, the last of those expats was still piloting ships in Freeport Harbor, at Barco, and at South Riding Point. South Riding Point one that's finished even later than that, right? But this is how it was. We had no black pilots, all white. The only Bahamian pilots were the ones in Nassau, because we didn't have pilots on no other family island. Now, I don't know how they dealt with Morton, if Morton was around back then, but I assume they would have also had an expat until such time as, I don't know who's the first Bahamian. I know Stevie, my good boy, may his soul rest in peace. Stevie was Stevie Fox, or Fox. He was the Bahamian senior pilot there for a long time. I know him very well. And then, of course, Alex would have taken over, and so on and so forth. So we don't know about that down there, but what we do know is the minister was giving them licenses, right? And then when Barco came around, they're so close to Freeport Harbor, but they're not in the Deepwater Harbor. So, you know, the port director cannot give out licenses for Barco pilots. Barco cannot give out license for Barco pilots. Same as further up the road, South Riding Point. So what happened? They're operating without licenses, eh? Mind you, they got trained pilots. And that's where most of the pilots trained for this country, right there at Barco. Most of the Bahamian pilots we have trained starting with Barco. So we can't knock that. We look at that, but we can't knock that. And like everything else, time moves on. So we now have a new mandate for piloting the cruise ships when they report or arrive and leave their private islands, their own facilities. They own these places. I've been crying for years. Why? Are they piloting their own ships? This don't happen nowhere else in the world. You go to the US, you go to Europe, you go to Asia, you're not going to be carrying your ship in all on your own. Because somebody got to make that money. You may be capable of carrying it all on your own, but you don't work in that country. That's a job that the foreigners doing. And they know that they can't go to Miami and carry their own ship in, or Port Everglades, or Port Canaveral, or any port in the US. Mind you, they could do it. And usually when the pilot come on board, they do it. The pilot don't get involved because they know what they're doing. These master mariners and captain and staff captains and chief mates and stuff on these cruise ships, I want you to know they ain't nothing to play with. They don't need no help in taking their ships in places like Miami. Now they need help if they're trying to get in Nassau Harbor. In some cases, some of them can do it on their own. I've watched them do it. Freeport may be a little more difficult, right? I think they could try it on their own. Mind you, they used to do it for, I think, with the boat name which used to be coming in and out of Freeport. That ain't like them big cruise ships. So we ain't giving that no nothing. But as time moves on, we realize that the demand for piloting is increasing. And September 1st is fast approaching. And as a country, we have to make sure that these cruise ships start to pay their fair share. So we can't mess around on this one. We have to make sure we have pilots ready and available on day one. And we've been doing a lot of things in this country, from the authorities side, the port control and the minister, and from the piloting side, primarily using the Freeport pilots, the people who trained at Barco and that Freeport Harbor and the ones who were doing the anchorage and that area, right? Those are the people who have made themselves available to take care of this mandate. And we got to make sure that happens. This country cannot fail when it comes to getting what we're supposed to get from these ships. We have to move on to getting what we're supposed to get from these private islands for the jet skis and the parasails and the non-motorized equipment and all the rest of that stuff. Because the cruise ships ain't supposed to be making that kind of money in our country and they're only visiting. Our laws and policies from our government protects those areas for Bahamians only. And piece by piece we got to get them. And this show will continue to push for them. The minister now has to appoint pilots to take care of this cruise ship mandate, to take on pilots when they come in as of September 1st. Numbers are not very important. We just need to make sure we got enough to take care of the jobs. How we go about galvanizing these pilots. While it may be an activity that leaves a lot to desire. We have to allow this to happen. And we are going to allow this to happen. Because those cruise ships are not going to be able to say, oh, we wanted to pay them, but they didn't show up. Because they could be there. We could be there. The pilots could be there, ready to take on these jobs. We have to protect these jobs for pilots yet unborn. Our country today has more cruise ship destinations than perhaps any other country in this entire world. And when I say destinations, I'm not talking about home ports. I'm talking about sites where they go to visit. And I believe, because I can tell you, you think about all those private islands, you're talking about many 10, 12 destinations. And then you got Nassau as another destination, Freeport is another destination. You're looking at, what, between 10 and 15 destinations for cruise ship. And that's only this northern side, this northwestern side. What's going to happen when we get the green light from our government, whichever government in power, to build up port, docks and whatnot in the southeastern section of our country? Because that's got to happen. The rate that these cruise ships are being built, the size of these cruise ships, the amount of fuel they need, it's going to be in their best interest to start doing cruises where they have at least 10 different stops in the Bahamas. 10 different stops, 8 of which should be provided by the government. They could do a weekly cruise, they could do a 2-weekly cruise without leaving the Bahamas. How much fuel would they save? And we'll need more pilots, eh? So let's get started. Let's make sure this thing happens and let's keep rolling it. So those are the things we want to talk about. And this new mandate is going to be too big to fail. The minister is going to appoint pilots and we're going to get this going. But we also can use this as an opportunity to adopt a model for pilots where we don't necessarily need to have the greediness that some of these organizations lashing out on pilots. The evil and the wicked ways of manipulating licensed pilots. These entities cannot be considered, as Mr. Rodney Monk would say, as safe. They are unsafe. They are not safe. I regard them as uncircumcised Negroes the way they're raping these qualified pilots. Because when the pilot do the work, they only give them a little chip. It's like they're tipping the pilot and keeping all the money. And I said, yeah, I said it. And I wish one of them called me and say it ain't true. Because I know them all. And I know what each one of them doing. So ladies and gentlemen, you know, that concludes our first section. When I return, I ain't looking for no calls. I ain't even looking at this phone. I don't want no calls tonight. You all take that. But if you feel so pressed to call, boy, be my guest. Because we reeling it out tonight. Be sure to stay tuned as we delve into discussions, deep discussions on these maritime issues, these pilot organizations that are doing folly. We can go deep into what a pilot really does. We're talking maritime people. You are listening to Maritime Matters. At this point, we move to our first break. And when we return, we will engage the deeper portion of marine/maritime pilots in the Bahamas. You don't want to touch that dial as we move to our break.
At Bahamas Maritime Connection Limited, we offer first-class maritime security services throughout the Bahamas and the wider Caribbean. As experts in maritime security, we specialize in production of ISPS assessments and plans, verification audits, certified familiarization training, and port security consultancy, just to name a few. Our services also include provision of a security force to maintain all required ISPS facility security compliance. For all your maritime security needs, visit us today in Nassau at our East Street South location or in Freeport in the Kipling Building. Call us at 392-3515 or follow us on all social media platforms. Bahamas Maritime Connection, your leader in maritime security. Let's help you make the connection. At One-on-One Pharmacy, our friendly staff is ready to serve you. Visit us today for all your prescription and over-the-counter needs at our East Street South or Charles Saunders Highway locations. We're open Monday through Saturday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and from 9 to 4 on Sundays. In a rush? Send your refill scripts online at oneononepharmacy.com or ask about our convenient pickup service. One-on-One Pharmacy, providing personal health care with people at heart.
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to Maritime Matters. And on this show, we talk maritime. I am your host, Captain Glenn Bain. My producer for the night, the great Mr. Craig Gibson. Maritime Matters airs weekly at 17:05, that's 5:05 p.m. every Tuesday here on Love 97 FM. The primary purpose of our show is to sensitize Bahamians of opportunities in the maritime sector. We also cover current maritime issues from the domestic and international maritime feeds. The phone number to call us, should you wish to get in on this discussion, and please, not tonight, don't go out playing around here tonight, 326-8255. I give it again, 326-8255. You can call, but you can be like a prime minister because you better be brave. To hear a replay of the show or any of our previous shows, simply hit us up at any time via our YouTube page, that's Maritime Matters Bahamas. Just go to YouTube on your electronic device and type into the search box Maritime Matters Bahamas. Just like I love you, Maritime Matters Bahamas. So let's talk piloting. What is a marine pilot? A marine pilot, now this Google now, I'm giving you all what Google say. A marine pilot, also known as maritime pilot, harbor pilot, or ship pilot, is a mariner with specialized knowledge of local waterways, including harbors and river mouths. So not only you bring in a ship from the ocean inside the harbor, sometimes you got long areas like the Mississippi River would go for miles and miles and miles. You got pilots for this section, pilots for that section, pilot from bringing it out in the ocean into the mouth and come up to New Orleans or whatever. So you got all kinds of situations. You got pilots for the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, these inland waterways. Yeah. So you got all kinds of different pilots. You got pilots who just deal with tankers, some who just deal with container ships, pilots who deal only with cruise ships, pilots, but in this region, the Bahamas and South Florida, our pilots do everything. Because when you think about the port of Miami, they got all kinds of ships that need pilots. They're not going to turn them away because being a pilot is making money. You go on that ship and you serve as an expert guidance to the pilot. And in many cases, the pilot actually takes over the ship. The pilot boat takes him out to the ship. He gets on the ladder. He gets in the ship. He goes, climbs up, or takes the elevator up to the bridge. When you get on the bridge, good morning, Captain. Oh, good morning, pilot. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, pilot, good morning. Everybody saying good morning. Pilot, would you like some coffee? I think I'll drink tea this morning. Let's get me some water, according to what the situation. But you got to take something, right? And at some point, when the pilot settles in, the captain says, okay, pilot, you got the ship. You know what that means? That means from that point on, you got to take that man ship from the ocean into the harbor. And you take over everything. everything that is said on that bridge, any instruction given is given by the pilot. You got a helmsman who's steering the ship. You tell him what to do. Port 10. Port 10 pilot. Ease to 5. Ease to port 5. Midships. Hard to starboard. Slow down. Your engine's going ahead normally at what? Half speed. Slow on 2. Okay, so you take it from half on 2, bring it down to slow on 2. Some ships got 1 engine, but these cruise ships got 2, right? And then you stop the port engine, you're going to make a turn, and you do what you got to do. Back 2 on 2 engines. Stop starboard engine. Back 3 on port engine. Because you're doing things to cause your ship bow to move where you want it to go, right? And this is what pilots do. They go on the ship and they direct that ship based on conning instructions or conning orders to get into that harbor. And at some point, the captain is comfortable and say, okay, pilot, I'll take it from you. Because they know how to maneuver their ships better than the pilot. They've been maneuvering their ships every day. So they would take the ship over once they know it's in safe waters, they're in the turning basin, and they will just back it onto the dock. So a lot of times when you see the ship come on the dock kind of high, people say, well, that pilot didn't know what he's doing. The pilot didn't even involved in that. Right? There used to be a time when most pilots, the pilot used to basically bring the ship right up to the dock because most ships used to use tugboats. And the pilot has his radio giving the tugboat captain orders. The captain of the ship wouldn't be able to do that. But those days are gone for cruise ships. Cruise ships got things called bow thrusters and stern thrusters. These are things that pushes the boat sideways. They're stronger than any tugboat you could find out there. That's how big they are and how powerful they are with these new cruise ships. So usually the pilot plays a small role with cruise ships these days, especially where these cruise ships are going to go now. Anyway, that's basically what the pilot does, right? And the pilots, as prescribed under the Port Authority Act, says a pilot means a person duly licensed as a pilot under the provisions of this act. So the Port Authority Act said the minister gives you a license after certain things have been done. And it says a pilot is somebody who is licensed by the minister. Nobody else, the minister. And of course, if you go to the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, which is the only other area pilot could receive a license, and this comes under the Freeport Harbor rules of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. It don't tell you what is a pilot. So don't look under definitions for the word pilot. You ain't gonna find it. What they have though is the port director. See, we don't have a port director for Nassau because the minister deals with that in Nassau. If the minister would have, government in charge of everything in this country, but because of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, they got leverage to do some things that the government really does everywhere else. And part of that is appointing people to be pilots. And like I told you, most of those people, when the thing first gone down, were foreigners, expats, who were already pilots coming and getting a license from the port director to bring ships in and out. Same thing at Boko, same thing at Burma. And that just went on until now. And it'll continue to go on in Freeport Harbor. We don't know what happened at Boko. We don't know what happened at South Riding Point. Because right now they really, we need to look at that. But the Hawksbill Creek Agreement goes on. Freeport Harbor goes on with the port director. And the government can't get in that. So, how does one become a pilot? Because I know we got some people out there who probably captains on boats right now. Man, them fellas, they sound like the kind of job I want. You don't have to go to sea. You're on land and you just go bring the boat in and go back home and come back and move the boat when it's time to move the boat. That sounds like a job made in heaven. And then you're getting paid more than they're getting paid as a ship captain, which is true. It's true. Boy, but they're still getting robbed. Anyhow, how to become a pilot? The book say, the book being the Port Authority Act, that's the only way you can find it. You have to be an apprentice first. An apprentice, just like every other job. Like I guess doctors, lawyers, not so much lawyers, I guess accountants. You got to apprentice before you could actually, be doing the job on your own. You got to work with somebody who know what they're doing first for a while. So there are provisions for apprentices under the Port Authority Act. And it states that preliminary examination of applicant. So, before you even be considered to be an apprentice, you're supposed to have been preliminary examined. You're supposed to come with certain qualifications to say you're suitable to be an apprentice to train to become a pilot. Not, oh, my daddy's a pilot, so I won't be an apprentice. No, they're supposed to work like, man, you be knows, work like that sometimes. But it's a bunch of foolishness. And the Act do not support it. So you have your preliminary examination to be sure that, I'll tell you what they do in the States. When they're ready for a pilot apprentices, they don't bring in like 2 at a time, eh? Because 2 guys, they're in their 70s and they're getting ready to retire. So they replace them. They need 2 pilot apprentices. You know what they do? They have 1 general exam. And the 2 persons who come first gets to be those 2 apprentices. But before you could take that exam, they tell you have to be a master mariner with so much years of sea time as a master mariner. Then you have to have captain the ship, because you could be a master mariner and still be a chief mate. And you got to do all of this just to make that short list of people who could take the exams. So everybody who's taking this exam are master mariners. Of course, we don't have none of them in the Bahamas. We got like 2 or 3, but you know, they ain't plentiful in the Bahamas. So if we say that being enough, I have no Bahamian pilots, right? We normally go with people who went off to maritime school. They got their third mate Coast Guard license or third mate officer in charge of navigation watch that the BMA would normally issue them. An officer in charge of navigation watch for any size ships anywhere in the world. And that would be their certification to now start going to sea in the real world. But ain't much of them is go to sea in the real world. They just come to Freeport and join up with Borco or join up with Freeport Harbor. Oh, I want trained to be a pilot. I was a pilot apprentice. Because they got that piece of paper saying they are basically officer in charge of navigation watch international, which is good. I mean, come on. At least you're starting some way. Because we got in Nassau, I don't think nobody. Well, I can't say nobody. We got 1 or 2. But most of the pilots in Nassau are basically didn't go off to maritime school and get that certified officer in charge of navigation watch or third mate or whatever it is and sail internationally. And the 1 or 2 that did get it, they didn't do no international sail. They never became a captain of no ship. And they can't fool me, because I know. If you don't believe, I want, like I said, want one of them to call me. Let me embarrass them on national radio tonight. So, we do things in many ways. So the book say, to be a pilot apprentice, you have a preliminary examination. And then the successful candidate, if they choose you to be the apprentice out of the lot of people who try to be apprentice, then you have to undergo 3 continuous years of apprenticeship. Each year touching your qualification and recommending the maximum size of ship to be piloted by the examinee. So while you're a pilot apprentice, you're supposed to be bringing in smaller ships. And as you move along, because only 3 years now, after 3 years you're supposed to be fully cleared. Right? Don't happen in Nassau. It happens in Freeport. Almost all over. Why don't it happen in Nassau? Because like I tell you, some people don't want it to happen. Some people are greedy. Evil, wicked, unsaved, uncircumcised Negroes. They don't want that to happen. They know the book say that, you know. Because when I was being trained as a pilot apprentice, you know me, I biggity. I challenge it. And of course at the time we had a port controller who didn't wear the hell of beans. So all he wanted to do, them fellas had them in their pocket. So while I was supposed to have certain things according to this regulation, They told me, even in the Ministry of Transport, said, well, we sent it to the AG office for an opinion. And they come back and say, they're saying it happen. I said, but the book say it. Let me see the opinion. They never let me see it. Liars. Wicked, evil, protecting the pilots. And doing their wickedness. So they say, you do it for 3 years, touching your qualification, and recommending the maximum size ship to be piloted by the examinee. After examination, so after 3 years, you take another exam. Or after those 3 years of being examined, he attains a certificate of qualification to be entitled to a preference for appointment as a pilot. So when your 3 years apprenticeship finished, you're supposed to be bringing in all the ships. And then you get a certificate saying, you're now a qualified pilot. But you don't get no pilot license yet. Because the book says you can only have 4 at a time. So when you get that certificate and you're the first one to get that, because other people coming behind you and they can get the same certificate, but who gets it first will be next in line to be a pilot, because it says he attains a certificate of qualification to be entitled to a preference for appointment as a pilot. You are entitled to a preference to be appointed. Nobody can take that from you once you get that. That's why they didn't want to give it to me. I know. But anyway, that's the way it is according to the book. Wherever the minister's given out the license, that's the way it's supposed to happen. You know, book ain't say nothing but what the port controller, what the port director do in Freeport. Because like I tell you, most of those people are coming in as experts. But we don't have no more experts today. All the Bahamians. And we have got a lot of very young, astute, good pilots in Freeport that went off to maritime school, got their certification as an officer in charge of navigation watch, came back, and they went through the ropes, and they never gone on high seas and get some real, but then we ain't worried about that, because we know they wasn't into that, right? But they could pilot ships and they could do it well. They're young, some ain't 30 yet. But are they being paid accordingly? Because they're young when they become pilots in Florida as well. But once they make pilot after 2 years being in the only 2 years over there, it's 3 years under our law. Over there it's only 2 years. Then they become pilots. And then they start to make over $300,000 a year. All of them. Because they see pilots over there as professionals who should be making that kind of money. Over here should be the same thing, but people want to rob the pilots. So the pilots don't make that kind of money. And then the book goes to say, who supervises those pilots once they get appointed? One of the duties of the port controller is, and I quote from the Port Authority Act, to supervise and enforce the discharge of their duties by pilots. So the boss of the pilots is the port controller. And they say that's in Nassau. That's for all Bahamas. Just like the minister gave out the license, the port controller deals with all the licenses. He makes sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. Make sure they have boats. Make sure those boats get inspected and all the rest of that. And then it's a pilot is to have his own pilot boat. That's the Port Authority Act, Section 51. And that's where they say that you need to keep your boat maintained, yada, yada. So you got now a handful of pilots. All have their own pilot boat. And they would race for the job. And they decided, this don't make no sense. Let's unify and form an association where we'll all respect each other as equals. And that's what's going on. 4 white boys. And then in Nassau Harbor, in the preliminary years, like I say, you had the fathers passing the trade on to their son. So although they had an association, the association probably had 2 or 3 pilot boats. They need 4 no more because all of them now using the same equipment. The minister didn't say to them, oh, y'all could come together and do it, but the minister didn't say they couldn't do it either. So they form an association. There's no pilot association nowhere under our laws. So any one of them who calling themselves a pilot association, it's a private company. We are plenty skullduggery going on. Now I can tell you which one of them call me and tell me, you know, skullduggery going on here. Because I know. So the father would pass it on to their son. They'll all have a pilot boat. They all became equal. All white. And the first black pilot in the country, I won't say Nassau Harbor, but in the whole country, was the pilot called, and he used to tell them his name in full, George Garnett Roll. Oh, I ride with that man over and over again. You have to respect him. And then when you find out what he went through to become a pilot, because you still had all the prejudice going on. It's back in the 60s, 70s, eh? They didn't want a black man drive no ship, but he's no pilot, because they know that money got to make for white people. But he got through. And he didn't just get through. He went to Barco. Once he became a trained apprentice in Nassau, he got a job as a pilot in the Barco system. Again, not just, he's no Conky Joes, these white expats. And they would push him in the corner, and he would just go in the corner and mind his own business, because he had no win. It was only him one, and all of them looking down on him. And then when he came back to Nassau to become a pilot, when an opening came, they didn't want him. They wanted to supersede him with another Conky Joe. But we had a port controller by the name of Leon Flowers that stretched out his hand and he stood up on his feet and said, "Not on my watch." And he personally told me all the things he had to do to ensure that George Garnett Roll was appointed a pilot in Nassau Harbor. And of course, he was the only black pilot for a while. Yes! Until years down the road, we had the second black pilot for Nassau Harbor, Pilot Eugene Monroe. And he came in, didn't come through the Nassau system, came in from Freeport. And then you had 2 black and 2 white, and they used to say it all the time. Now we got 2 black and 2 white, and then they came in the 3rd black. my boy Alvin Taylor. So you have now 3 black, 1 white. And you know what the saying was before that 3rd pilot came in? Boy, we need to balance, keep this thing balanced. But they couldn't find no white Conky Joes or whatever that was in the system. So now we have all blacks. But that's what that team name from who's playing rugby from Tingham, all blacks. And I think we got all blacks all over the place. If we got any white pilot in the Bahamas today, I don't know. But I know we got all Bahamians. We have some bright fellas in Freeport somewhere. I don't know these brothers, right? But we have come a long way, because when Pilot Roll joined, they already had an association, but they had it set up a little different now, because now one guy out and you got to come in, so you got to buy your way in. You don't just sneak in there talking about you making all this money what they making. You got to buy the guy out who going out. You got to buy his stuff and buy his shares. And I think they're still trying to cause you to say you got to do that today. I don't know. Boy, let me tell you something. This body thing ain't easy, you know. But that's what they call an association. And Freeport Harbor in the preliminary years, of course, Barco was the big beast. And the Freeport Harbor first had the expat. Then Barco came with expats. And then, like I say, Pilot Roll went there, the first black. Then he came out. And then they started to send people off to, I think Eugene Monroe would have been the first person they sent off to Maritime School in New York, SUNY. And he would not have only gotten his Coast Guard 3rd mate license, he also got his master's degree. Smart young man. And he came back to Barco and he became, I think, the first Bahamian pilot that went through Maritime School. And of course, following him was my good friend Cliff and Eddie. They went off to the UK and did their training, and they came back. So we started to have a bunch of Bahamian pilots taking over from the expats, and they put a freeze on bringing in expats, and then, well, of course, they still had some in the system. And that's how it went. So if you could be a pilot in this country, you had to either been in the Nassau system, in the Barco system, in the South Riding system, because South Riding Point eventually sent off some native Bahamians, well, black fellas like me. Macarius Rowell would have been the first one, and he became the first Bahamian master mariner. Because he went off, and when he came back, he was a master mariner, which is really the highest you could get going to sea. You could be a master mariner. And then it was Dwayne Hutchison, who now runs the BMA. He got that scholarship from Burma at the time. I don't know what the name was when they sent him off. But we had some good stuff coming out of these companies. And again, they came back and they worked for these companies. And I see my time going. And I see I ain't getting no call. Boy, y'all doing me a favor tonight. I want to call. I got plenty to talk about. I got plenty more to talk about. We ain't really get down to the nitty-gritty yet, right? So we had the Nassau system, and then we had the Freeport system. And then what we found is that the pilots had to come through the Nassau pilotage system as apprentices, then go off to Freeport, work for Barco, and then come back in the system as a pilot in Nassau. And that was the route that Pilot Rowell took, Pilot Chris Brown took. Eugene Monroe basically followed Chris Brown, although he didn't come through the Nassau system. He went through the Barco system and then the Freeport Harbor system. And then that's just the way it was back then, eh? But that kind of changed now. And it didn't have to change. Well, it had to change because it shouldn't have been happening. But we had apprentices in the system, like my good friend Chauvelin Josie. Years and years, he did decades as a pilot apprentice. Never became a pilot because he was overlooked by others. Elvin Taylor, Freddie Gray, they were also overlooked. But they're pilots now, which is good. I'm a pilot now, which is good. But there are some other things that ain't so good, eh? When it comes to this pilotage system. And I am almost sure the minister is not aware of this. And I'm not talking about Minister Jobette Kobe Davis. I'm talking about the Minister of Transport, period. When I was around, it was Glennisana Martin and what's his name? Dion folks and those type of people. And they just accepted that ships were coming in. We had pilots bringing them in, and they really go on to the nits and grits to find out what need to be fixed. That's why the day they ain't fixed yet, right? But it gets fixed. Mark my word when I tell you, these things will fix because they're wrong. They're very, very wrong. And they stem out of greed, evilness, wicked ways, unsaved, and uncircumcised Negroes. And if they don't believe me, let them call me. If they say I wrong, if y'all say I wrong, somebody call and tell me, oh, they ain't that bad. They ain't that bad. That's because y'all don't know. So we moved to the Association of Pilots. I told you they associated so that they don't have to do what the act say, race for job, right? And what do I think a pilots association should look like in this country? Now we can't forget that we got a lot of pilots in Freeport Harbor and a lot of pilots at Barco. Well, Buckeye now. Being taken advantage of every day. Because those ports charge the big bucks. And they have the pilot on staff and pay them a salary. But if they had that pilots association that was started by this back in the 70s, Barco, Chris Brown and Montez or whatever his name, they started a pilot association of Bahamians so that they would take over those jobs at Barco. And they would charge the ships for their services. And then Chris was taken back to Nassau, and Mandel couldn't do it by himself. and that didn't work out, and then some other fellas pick it up. I can stop calling names, right? 'Cause I ain't trying to get caught up in calling names right now. But that association came back to life a few times. And then you heard about the group of pilots that got together and tried to pressurize Freeport Harbor and say, we are an association and we want to pilot ships in and out of Freeport Harbor. But see, they obviously didn't know at the time. And I wish they'd have talked to me so I could have tell them that Freeport Harbor didn't come under the Port Authority Act. It came under the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. And they had the rights, because when they left, the port director could have bring in expats. The government could do nothing but that. But in the infinite wisdom of the port director at the time, who's still the port director, he found Bahamians that were suitable to be readily trained to become pilots real quick. And they became pilots. And so Freeport Harbor survived that feat without having to bring in expats again. And somehow the government got wind, well, not got wind, they got concerned that these young men are pilots and now they can't have no job because Barco had enough. Freeport Harbor didn't want them no more. They didn't replace them. So they made Freeport Harbor take a couple back. We know the story. I ain't talking nothing with these fellas here, and I hope they're listening, right? Some gone back. But they were all given licenses to operate the anchorage outside of Freeport Harbor. And then that extended into going into Bimini, because Bimini built a dock. And, well, of course, Bimini ain't no real port. The cruise ships didn't build that. Bimini built that. So they utilized pilots from day one. And so those pilots from the anchorage started to do Bimini, started to do Ocean Key, and so on and so forth. Which was good. We needed that. Right? So now the pilotage extended beyond Freeport Harbor and Barco and South Riding Point. Excuse me. And now we have a situation where we have room for more expansion of pilots. And I asked, what should that be like? What should the group of pilots coming to do these new jobs look like? Should they be like Freeport Harbor, who's basically, I would call it ripping off the pilots? Or Barco ripping off the pilots? The pilots, they if they make $120,000 a year, that's big bucks. While a set in Florida, each making $300,000 plus. And while if you do have a proper association to deal with these areas, well, of course, you can't deal with Freeport Harbor because that one over. They got laws we can't touch. But wherever else, we need pilots in this country outside of Freeport Harbor and Nassau Harbor. We should have what I would call the Model Pilots Association to take care of those jobs so that pilots will get what pilots are supposed to get, not swing. An organization whose model will be designed to ensure equal benefits to all interested pilots. Because you could be a pilot with a license, we could treat you as such. No one pilot should benefit more than the other, irrespective of seniority or experience, because they're all piloting the same boats. They all of them know how to do it. An organization that is uniquely designed to meet the needs of local pilots while giving them an opportunity to become a part of something larger than any one individual or any one organization that will provide pension benefits, insurances, training for apprentices that are interested in becoming pilots, and all the rest of that stuff, and proper payment. You will get at least 50% of what you work for. If you bring in a ship, 50% of the money goes to you. This is what will add up to you getting over $300,000 a year for each pilot who works They're 2 week shift one and 2 week shift one, like they do in the US. And this association should have absolutely nothing to do with Freeport Harbor Company or Grand Bahama Port Authority. Let them run their law and do their thing there. But an association of pilots for the entire Bahamas outside of these niche areas, and eventually, of course, everywhere outside of Freeport Harbor, should be a part of this model association where every pilot is treated equally. Every pilot has equal value in getting benefits from this organization. And once you become a pilot, you're welcome. And this is where we need to go. So this new mandate for piloting at private cruise ship facilities, I hasten to say again, it's too big to fail. But the entity that is dealing with this, they want to adopt the same old take advantage of licensed pilot arrangement. This entity wants to contract licensed pilots to do the work. Pay them 20% of the money and keep the next 80% in the kitty. But of course, they got to be paying for everything else, right? But everything else don't weigh 80%. I don't wake up, I don't do the figures, I don't do the math. I wish one of them would call. I don't do the math on it. And all it boils down to is that this lot is greedy, they are evil, wicked, not safe and uncircumcised Negroes that don't want to be fair. Mind you, these are the same guys that decided to leave Freeport Harbor because they don't think they're being treated fairly. So why is it now that you want to bring in pilots on contract and treat them unfairly? Because you're greedy. You're evil, you're wicked, you ain't safe, and you uncircumcised. And I can be watching you. And the port controller can be watching you. And I'm sure the minister is going to be watching you. Because after all that work the minister did and the port controller did to make this mandate possible, we cannot afford for it to fail. But know that that does not mean that provides you with an opportunity to take advantage of licensed pilots after the minister licensed them. And based on the act, they should all have their own pilot boat. And based on that, those pilots with their own pilot boats will merge together as a unit and decide who will do what, where, when, and why. And share equally. Not allow one pilot to make 20% whenever he maneuver a ship. And some people who even ain't piloting no ship at all have a big part to play with the company that's getting the 80%. So, I must even know maths. Because this certainly should be unacceptable in any arena. The minister appoints the pilot and this evil entity takes advantage of them. But we ain't got no another option at this stage, eh? So we gotta watch you guys as you do your thing. But like I told you, the day of reckoning will come. It will be fixed. It will have to be fixed. Because like one of our previous leaders used to say, not on my watch. He used to say that, and he meant that. Not on his watch. Certain things ain't gonna happen on his watch. These wicked, evil, greedy, unsaved, uncircumcised operations ain't gonna happen on his watch. Ain't gonna happen on Glenn Bain's watch. And while it's happening now, I want you to know and I want you to remember that you're ripping people off. Just like you were being ripped off and didn't want to be, now you want to rip somebody else off. Why? This is the perfect opportunity to adopt a new model to associate pilots that the minister is giving licenses to so that they can get their fair share. We're getting the fair share from the cruise ships. Why, but the pilots who bringing them in now ain't getting their fair share. Because of greed. Because of wicked and evil things that a group of Negroes decided we could put this together and we could just rape the system so we could be rich. While everybody could have been rich, because they say a rising tide floats all vessels. But they get their own tide going on raising theirs while the rest stay down there. Not saved, uncircumcised Negroes. Ladies and gentlemen, we go to our last and second break. And when we return, we're going to wrap this up. So please stay tuned to Maritime Matters. I am your host, Captain Glenn Bain. I am joined by our wonderful producer, Mr. Craig Gibson. As we move to our second break.
At Bahamas Maritime Connection Limited, we offer first-class maritime security services throughout the Bahamas and the wider Caribbean. As experts in maritime security, we specialize in production of ISPS assessments and plans, verification audits, certified familiarization training, and port security consultancy, just to name a few. Our services also include provision of a security force to maintain all required ISPS facility security compliance. For all your maritime security needs, visit us today in Nassau at our East Street South location or in Freeport in the Kipling Building. Call us at 392-3515 or follow us on all social media platforms. Bahamas Maritime Connection, your leader in maritime security. Let's help you make the connection. At One-on-One Pharmacy, our friendly staff is ready to serve you. Visit us today for all your prescription and over-the-counter needs at our East Street South or Charles Saunders Highway locations. We're open Monday through Saturday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and from 9 to 4 on Sundays. In a rush? Send your refill scripts online at oneononepharmacy.com or ask about our convenient pickup service. One-on-One Pharmacy, providing personal health care with people at heart.
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting when the evening comes, watching the ships roll in, then I'll watch them roll away.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our coverage of Maritime Matters. We're back for our last 10 minutes. Wanted to tell you what happened to me, but I ain't gonna do that. Let's just look at these piloted situations in our country. We have the grandfather of them all, the port of Nassau. Where we have two sets or two groupings of pilots. We got some for Nassau Harbor proper, where the cruise ships come in, and we got some for Clifton Pier, where the tankers come in. And these are two groups from one split. And I'm not going into too much details, but I can tell you that the split was done because somebody was being treated unfairly. And eventually they branch out and did their own thing. Now they have their little group going on. And that little group, that little group is not being run fairly. Right? Then we got the Freeport situations. Freeport, we got Freeport Harbor Company. That is really the only entity of the big three, that has the authority to issue licenses. The only other entity in the whole country that has the authority to issue licenses to pilots. On the outside, we got Buckeye or Barco, which basically has a very robust system, but no real licenses for pilots. And again, these people are not being treated fairly. They're not making not even half of the salary that they should be making. Same thing with Freeport Harbor. They may think they're making money because they're making over $100,000 a year. But if they look at what they really should be making based on those ship movements, they might faint. We should not be any different than what happens in Florida, because the amount of ships we have compared to the amount of ships they have and the amount of pilots they have, we should be on equal footing, at least $300,000 a year. Anybody that names a marine pilot that is qualified and certified as such. Apprenticeship is a different story. I know how you can pay them, but that's irrelevant. But your pilots should be paid like professional pilots. That's Freeport Harbor, Barco, and South Riding Point. That's the way it should be. Again, you got on the Freeport Anchorage and Bimini and what's going to now be some of the cruise ship private destinations. A company that doesn't really want to treat all pilots fairly. One pilot had left. They wanted that guy punished. But then there was no provision to punish him because he didn't do anything worthy of being punished. And he's still a pilot. But he should never have to want to leave, because if the system was set up properly, it wouldn't have come to that. But then, of course, you will have the greed, the evil, wicked, the uncircumcised, unsafe activities that causes some people to say, I had enough, I had too much, I ain't doing it no more. But they still have their license from the minister. You can't take that back from them, because you have a little organization that even in the act that the minister didn't even endorse, because there's no provision for that. And that's why all of these arrangements got to understand, if you want to survive without fear of losing out some of what you have, you treat pilots as pilots. All pilots should be equal. All pilots should receive equal returns based on the amount of ships they move. And then you wouldn't have to be giving them these little things to sign to say, oh, if you leave me, you can't go work nowhere else. Although the minister gave you a license, you can't use that against me. What? Me and you get our license from the same place. Excuse me. And you tell me because me and you divorce or ain't together no more, I can't work? That's how wicked these people are. That's how evil they are. And that ain't only for this new crew or them old crew. That's for all of them. Have these little clause and thing in place to try and keep the wickedness going on in them systems. Those systems say. That's what we get going on, people. And our country at a time like this, we can't form a proper unification of pilots that doesn't allow the greed to factor in, the wickedness to factor in. We can't get a model pilots association for everybody to be happy, because some people feel like I can put something together and we can win like this. Let them wait for us, although we got the same license they have. We need an organization whose model will be designed to ensure equal benefits to all interested pilots. We need an organization where no one pilot benefits more than the other, irrespective of seniority, his experience, because they're all bringing in the same type ships. You get paid based on how much ships you move. And you get 50%, at least 50% of the movement of that ship. Because if you're a pilot and I'm a pilot, my man's around there's a pilot. An association is getting 50% of each ship each one else move. Association would have more than enough money to cover all expenses for the boats, expenses for the travel, expenses for the accommodations, and money to share at the end of the year among the pilots, because all of us own it. No, but that's too much for you to have. You're only a little pilot who making $120,000 a year. And we can let you now start making $250,000, $350,000 a year. What you could do with that kind of money? And with this new system now, you don't even want full-time pilots. We have enough pilots in this country that are free, loose, can take up these jobs and get together with a handful of pilots that are ready to retire, join up, form a proper association of pilots. And the jobs are being done. The minister ain't got nothing to worry about. The port control ain't got nothing to worry about, because these pilots have it set up the way it's supposed to be set up. They're being paid properly. The pilot boats are everything is being covered. That association can grow by owning buildings. That association can grow by eventually owning pilot boats. And that association is for active pilots. So when you get too old, you carry on smartly. We pay you your pension until you die. But once you're a pilot, you're being treated equally. The amount of ships you bring in and out of the harbor will determine how much money you make that year. Not some people even they want to go on no ship, but they want to control the money. And they pay you the payments, and they're making more than you, and they ain't part of the ship yet. And this is what these people set out to do. How evil and wicked is that? My friends, I wasn't feeling good tonight. I feel better now that I got some of that off my chest. Boy, because there's plenty I didn't get off my chest, and I can keep that in, because some things you don't have to let the world know everything. But I telling you, we need to fix this piloted situation, and I am telling you that on my watch, this is going to be fixed. No room for the greed. No room for the evil and wickedness. No room for the unsafe Negroes to just take advantage of other licensed pilots because they could. That is definitely not the way to go. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Maritime Matters. And while this concludes our show dedicated to maritime pilots in the Bahamas, We want them to know that we are watching. I am your host, Captain Glenn Bain. My wonderful producer, as always, the maestro himself, Mr. Craig Gibson. I am so happy that we had no callers. I don't think this is the kind of show where we even wanted callers. I thank you so much for listening. I say good night to my good old Annie Mae up there in Freeport. 92 years and going strong. Almost 93 next year. And with that, as always, I say to you, my dear listener, please keep listening. Maritime Matters, tick, 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 tick. Out.
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting when the evening comes, watching the ships roll in, then I'll watch them roll away again. Yeah, I'm sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. Just sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time. I left my home Georgia, headed for the Frisco Bay. I've had nothing to live for, look like nothing's gonna come my way. So I'm just gonna sit on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. Sitting on the dock of